A choir of about a dozen men and women are standing on a small riser at the front of St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Bloomington. In the pews, parishioners have their hands in the air, moving to the music, and a handful of them are singing along. Pastor Phil Amerson has a calming and wise presence.
Jesus says to the crowd, it's time to move on, to move from fear, selfishness, away from spiritual paralysis. When persons, no matter how well-meaning, become spiritual warfare mongers, spreading hate and toxic Christianity.
The organ stops. The large worship hall goes silent, and parishioners are listening intently to Pastor Amerson's message.
We are obliged to speak up. When Christian symbols and theology have been distorted, contradicting the core message of Jesus, we must admit a Christian identity problem and begin to address it. When the Bible is turned into a conspiracy decoder ring with proof texts that support a poisoned civic life, it's past time for intra-Christian dialogue.
Pastor Amerson invited me to today's service. Fittingly, he's giving a sermon cautioning the church against the idea of Christian nationalism.
Unbelievably, some leaders even distort the tragedy of slavery in our history, saying that counting persons as 3/5 human was a benefit. Claims that others who disagree are demon-possessed are pronounced. Those who differ are written off as, the woke ones. Followers, literally this is said, of the devil. Enough. Enough. It's time to speak up with a clear no. This is not who we as a nation were designed to be or who we are as a people of faith. All of the children of God are welcome. Let's listen and learn to disagree without such untruths that many take as true, and it leads them into violence.
There's an important thing to keep in mind as we move forward talking about the Christian nationalist movement. This particular expression of Christianity is a minority within the larger belief system. Exact numbers vary, but many sources say there are 45,000 different Christian denominations throughout the world. That's 45,000 different groups teaching their interpretation of what Christianity is, how followers should behave, and what acts of service to carry out within their communities. Which is why it's so important when talking about Christian nationalism to understand the theological ground that the movement stands on. This is Red, White, and Righteous, a podcast about Christian nationalism from the WFIU newsroom. I'm Clayton Baumgarth. Hey Andre, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Are you muted by chance?
Yes, sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you? How's the weather?
Andre Gagne is professor and chair of the Department of Theological Studies at Concordia University in Montreal. He's written a few books on the topic of Christian political movements. His latest is titled American Evangelicals for Trump. He's the one that brought up the idea of dominion theology as a key underpinning of Christian nationalism.
In my work, I talk about dominion theology. I provide a definition that a well-known researcher by the name of Frederick Clarkson, who works with Research Political Associates, has come up with. So it's essentially this idea that it's the belief that Christians have been called by God to exercise their authority over all aspects of society, be they political, social, or cultural. And it's to, exercise this form of hegemony of Christian ideas. What is the predominant view is that Christianity is not like any other religion in America. It's not like Islam, it's not like Buddhism, or it is predominantly Christian. It's the preeminence of Christianity is important. And that has to be reflected across the board.
Gagne says this belief is ripped right from the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. That verse reads, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground."
In the context, of course, God is talking to humanity. He's talking to humanity and giving them a kind of responsibility for governance, a well-rounded governance of creation. But for a lot of these people that embrace this idea of dominion theology, it's about Christians having that mandate, you see? And they see that, in fact, because of sin, at one point in the Genesis story, sin entered into the world. And what belonged to humankind has been lost. Sin has brought about a kind of rupture for humankind and brought about on earth and on creation a kind of rupture from the will of God. But this rupture is being healed in a sense, or has been healed through the sacrificial death of Jesus, through the fact that Jesus of Nazareth came into the world, died for humankind's sin, and reconciled human beings to God. And so this reconciliation, those that are reconciled with God are part of what is called the church, and they have now a responsibility to promote this reconciliation and promote God's will for the world.
Some denominations see that verse and make an abstract interpretation of the text and say this verse is about governing ourselves. Other, more conservative denominations tend to read the Bible as literally as possible. For them, those words mean Christians have an obligation to rule. Adherents to dominion theology even have a roadmap for how Christians can fulfill their mandate. In 1975, evangelicals Lauren Cunningham, Bill Bright, and Francis Schaeffer said they received a message from God. The message ordered them to invade the 7 spheres of society. Those are family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government.
But how do you go from an idea to actually accomplishing this? And this is where something else is brought into play for many of these people, is what is often referred to as the 7 Mountain Mandate. So the 7 Mountain Mandate is essentially the mobilization plan to bring about the dominion. You see, so dominion is the idea, 7 Mountain Mandate is the kind of mobilization strategy.
The 7 Mountain Mandate says that those peaks, or spheres of society, are currently controlled by non-believers and need to be brought under Christian control.
If you want to change, the music industry, then you have to have more Christian artists that actually make a difference in the entertainment world. So you see more and more people, for example, testifying that they've been converted or they accepted Christ as their personal savior and so on. And you see them, they're more outspoken. That, for a lot of these people that embrace the 7 Mountain Mandate, is a way to capture arts and entertainment. Same for the family. Same for education. If you have people that go and get involved in school boards and try to change the curriculum in certain schools, you're taking control of the educational mountain. So of course, these types of enterprises can be done locally, but also the goal is to have them done nationally.
This mandate would later fuse with evangelicalism and Pentecostalism to underlie the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, the key force in the propagation of Christian nationalist beliefs. This belief or movement advocates for spiritual warfare to bring about Christian dominion by weakening the separation of church and state. Coined by C. Peter Wagner, he called the NAR the most radical change in the way of doing church since the Protestant Reformation. Gagne was quoted in a 2022 article by New Republic saying the NAR is inherently political, it's in their DNA, and that the movement is dominionism in and of itself. The Southern Poverty Law Center characterized the NAR as the greatest threat to American democracy that most people have never heard of. The center also labeled the group as Christian supremacists. So when the phrase Christian nationalist comes up, know that the NAR, or New Apostolic Reformation, is a fundamental part of that movement. And similar to the use of the label Christian nationalist, Gagne says proponents of the Seven Mountain Mandate often try to make it seem more innocuous than he thinks it is.
What they'll tell you is that, yes, we believe in the Seven Mountain Mandate, but it's more as influence. Now, in terms of influence, if you want to influence, you can influence. But it's when that mandate becomes hegemonic as a project, that's an issue.
And like other researchers, the issue for Gagne isn't having Christian viewpoints in the public square.
Like in the US, you can't tell people, oh, because you're a Pentecostal, you can't get involved in politics. The problem is not that per se. The problem is more in terms of, can these groups, or are these groups able to live in a pluralistic democracy? It's not so much as being able to sit at the table and bring your perspective. It's being able to not try to impose a hegemonic view on everything else and everybody else, you see? And consider oneself as one of the many actors that compose the society itself. It's like any political party. They have their views, they push their views. And so up to a certain extent, we can't, if we're democracies, we have to make room for everyone. But it's how to negotiate their place amongst a plurality of voices that seems to be the problem.
This rise in dominionist beliefs is causing rifts throughout Christianity.
All right.
Phil.
You must be Clayton.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How
Good
you
to
doing?
see you. I'm well.
Good. That was great up there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Would you have any time after things calm down, we can just have a quick chat about what we talked about today?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be around. After his sermon, St. Luke's Pastor Amerson talked to me one-on-one about Christian morality.
I think we've seen over time morals of the church that influenced government. Certainly Lincoln struggled with that in his own way. Both the Roosevelts and Truman did. Eisenhower did. I mean, his comments about every tank and bomb that's built is stealing from the poor. Of course, Eisenhower grew up Quaker, I believe, in Kansas. I even think in some strange ways that people wouldn't understand Nixon was shaped by a moral vision. Unfortunately, politics corrupted him. But, the high mark for me, and I realize I'm heading for trouble, is Jimmy Carter. But war on poverty and I left out John Kennedy. Certainly Kennedy, what is being destroyed right now was really started by Kennedy more than anyone else, who set up international aid distribution, the Peace Corps, ways that he thought, and I agree, that helping people with assistance was in the long run a much more effective and less expensive way to show morality. His morality was his very Catholic mother and his Catholic family. Carter's was his very Baptist family. Eisenhower was Quaker. Bill Clinton and Hillary, in their own way, were United Methodists and were shaped by that.
But ultimately, Pastor Amerson says the morality he's talking about isn't just a Christian idea.
I don't want to go down rabbit holes, but morality does have a place in the body politic. And right now, we're being shaped by individualism. It's all about me, by exclusion. I'm more moral if I can keep someone else down. What is that? And by the last thing that I mentioned, community, inclusive, and sharing with others. I mean, as many people have said, the golden rule is not just Christian. And there was a golden rule in Hebrew tradition before that, and many other traditions. Buddhism, Jainism have something comparable.
His hope is that people begin to look around and see the state of the nation, and his way of doing that is by preaching the Bible.
I just think they're going to fall on their own petard. I think there's already such corruption and such selfishness. And I'm not just talking about Trump or the Republicans or Democrats in some ways. I just think we are in a time people are going to finally say, there's an aroma here I don't like the stench of. And it's happened before in other settings. What we've got to be careful of is that we don't fall into the authoritarianism or the fascism. That is, I think it's closer. I think we're closer to fascism today than any time in my lifetime. And I've lived through some pretty authoritarian times. But when people are just picked up on the street by folks in a mask, and those picking them up don't have to identify themselves, they're put into a van that's not marked, they're sent off to a prison in another country. What is that? And so at some point, my prayer is people will wake up and say, no, enough.
Before we parted, Pastor Amerson filled me in on the local church landscape in Bloomington and sent me on my way.
An interesting evangelical guy who's very thoughtful is Bob Whitaker, who's over at Christ Community Church. And I think he's Yale, Princeton, but that's a pretty evangelical church. The world is shifting, so that's what I would look for. What used to be considered conservative is now often mainline.
So that's who I met with next.
And this is our sanctuary.
Oh, wow.
And 550 chairs in here, I guess, something like that. So yeah, we have a beautiful space. We always appreciated it. Built this.
His office at Christ Community Church is filled with books about all sorts of topics, from religion to history and beyond, which makes sense considering his pedigree.
Years ago, I, felt a call to ministry and decided that was my next step. And I was at Yale at the time and did my MDiv there, and then an STM, and then did a doctorate at Princeton and landed here. And I've been here for 26 years now.
Interestingly, Pastor Whitaker mentioned during our conversation that his church used to go by a different name.
You may not know this about our church, but we used to be called Evangelical Community Church. We're now called Christ Community Church.
Why was
for
that?
This very reason. 2016, it became a political bloc of voters, according to the press. And evangelical had, in large part, lost its meaning. It meant political right wing. It meant all kinds of things. And even though I consider myself to this day an evangelical, coming out of what I would call the great evangelical tradition of the Great Reformation, right? With Martin Luther and John Calvin and all those. That to me is the way to define evangelical in its most broad sense. I embrace that. So I continue to call myself evangelical, but I never lead with that because it's become toxic in terms of conversation and dialogue.
He called this particular expression of evangelism that his church didn't want to be associated with a right-wing political perspective of Christianity.
My concern over this approach is that, in my opinion, the whole idea of Christianity has always been that it is an international religion, right? From the start, beginning with the book of Acts, the apostles, first thing they did is spread it throughout the Roman Empire. It wasn't Jewish, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. To use the words of the Apostle Paul, there's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, right? We're all one in Christ. So the notion of Christianity falling somewhere under the rubric of nationalism seems to be antithetical to the very theology of Jesus Christ. So, for instance, when you walked into this church, out there in the driveway area, you didn't see an American flag flying. If you were to walk into our sanctuary, you would see no American flag. If you were to walk into any of these classrooms, you would not see a nationalistic symbol. This is an international house of faith.
I asked Pastor Whitaker why he wouldn't want the laws of the nation to reflect a more Christian worldview.
There is far too much diversity in the Christian church to assume that only one way is the right way. So at this church, we have women elders. At this church, we do not, the description you gave is not reflective of us. It's reflective of some churches, maybe Pete Heg, whatever the heck his name is, maybe his church, maybe the pastor he quotes, but the pastor that he quotes is not the pastor that defines our reality here or millions of other Christians. So I guess I would say to Pete, stop it already. Okay? You're only representing your perspective and not the wide breadth of the Christian population.
Not only are people who aren't Christian left out of the Christian nationalist perspective, but so are other Christians who don't all believe the same things. Cool. Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Stop recording. After my visit with Pastor Whitaker, I went to another person Pastor Amerson recommended.
Exactly. Oh, it sounds like Matt is our organist is practicing. But this is our worship space. I'm Adrienne Meyer, and I'm the senior pastor at St. Thomas Lutheran Church. And how did I come to be in this realm? I've been a pastor for 15 years. In December, I grew up Lutheran. I don't know, for a very long time I've been wanting to be in a profession that was helping people, and sometime actually when I was a teenager it occurred to me that I could do that in the church.
Pastor Meyer's church is just a couple miles from Pastor Amerson's. She, as well as Pastor Amerson and Whitaker, have different beliefs, but they share a similar concern about the idea of state-sponsored religion.
I think that that's a really dangerous position. I think that from a scriptural and theological standpoint, religion offers the ability to be a check and a critique of power. And when power, as in the state, and religion are too enmeshed, that critique gets silenced, and normally to the detriment of people who are poor and marginalized.
Pastor Meyer says the separation of church and state is a necessary part of our country for a number of reasons.
I love my country, and I need an air gap between my faith and the laws of this nation in order for me to fulfill my religious obligation to my neighbor, to fulfill my obligation for their good. And if we only make laws that reflect my good, I am not acting as a Christian. I think addresses just that Christian nationalism on its face. But then when you get down into the problems that we're seeing, is this sense of I preached a couple of months ago that I think that diversity is God's design, and Christian nationalism fights against that reality. I think that I'm not a complementarianism. I think that men and women and non-binary folks, transgender folks, all deserve meaningful lives that include futures that they themselves help to direct. I think that the United States is a nation of immigrants, and that's what makes it beautiful. And what Christian nationalism stands for, to me, tears apart those pieces that I hold both as a citizen and as a person of faith.
So what about everyone else? What does having Christian nationalists trying to drum up support for their movement mean for people who aren't Christian? And how many people could be represented by that term? Well, according to the Pew Research Center, 65% of Hoosiers identify as Christian, with 32% being evangelical Protestants. 31% of Hoosiers identify as religiously unaffiliated. 3% represent all other religions of the world, and less than 1% of the state is Jewish or Muslim. Micah Beckwith's church, Life Church, as a member of Assemblies of God, also make up about 1% of the state. Those numbers aren't dissimilar to the rest of the country. 62% of Americans identify as Christian, 29% are unaffiliated, and 7% are Jewish, Muslim, or something else. And while there's no definitive statistics on the makeup of the country during its founding, these numbers illustrate that the country is now far more pluralistic than the almost exclusively Christian image that many Christian nationalists have of America in the 1700s. How's it going? No, it's all right. Clayton? Yes, Mohammed Syed, an imam with the Islamic Center of Bloomington, is part of the 26% of Americans who are non-Christian.
Before I come here, and also over the past years I lived here for 10 years. So for me, this country was kind of ideal, like for democracy, for freedoms, for this idea of living together.
Syed immigrated to the U.S. from Egypt in 2011.
So this was kind of, for me, one of the greatest success in the modern era, that you can create this kind of a melting pot where people live here with enjoying all those types of freedoms, regardless of any backgrounds.
Since President Trump started his second term, Syed's opinion has soured.
I don't want to say, but right now with the it was not even that clear in the first term of Trump, but right now I would see no, it is. Some people are trying to take this country back to the era before the Civil War. So, which is unfortunate, actually.
Syed views the rise of Christian nationalism as a threat to the foundations of the country.
It is always dangerous when you play the card of religion and try to enforce certain types of beliefs or your own interpretation of what you claim to be of the Christianity or whatever on people, because this kind of weaponizing the religion against the nation is not something that having good ramifications over the history.
In fact, Syed says the movement is a threat to anyone that is deemed an other, including other Christians.
I see it like a threat not only to Muslims. I would see it a threat to Muslims, Jews, and also people of color and people of different gender identity. So anyone who is different from a white Christian, who is here in the United States, I believe, so I would not think they would sympathize with Ukrainian Christians, for example, or different denominations of Christianity who live in either in Europe or in the Middle East or Africa.
I wanted to continue talking to that group Syed just mentioned, anyone who is different from a white Christian.
So I'm Jamie Buren. I'm the CEO of Bend the Arc Jewish Action.
Bend the Arc is the largest national Jewish organization that focuses on domestic policy and advocacy work for social justice.
This shouldn't be a Christian country. It shouldn't be a Jewish country. It shouldn't be a Muslim country. It's a country that's really, I think that the separation of church and state has existed for a long time for very important reasons. And I also think that, part of what is underneath a lot of this is, again, protecting a set of values where, it holds a myth that Christians are superior to everyone else, basically, that Christian philosophy, Christian beliefs are superior and that everyone else is inferior in this country. And we live in a world where that's challenged every day. You know, I think that the all of these attacks on DEI and on what they're, you know, calling wokeness is really about feeling threatened by, frankly, the success and the brilliance and the evolution of people of all faiths and backgrounds and races.
She sees the movement as the complete opposite of what America is supposed to be.
I think that if America is going to be the democracy that we claim to be, it can't be a country that is founded and focused on one set of religious beliefs. I think it just is antithetical to kind of the the like liberal democracy that we have been built to be.
The most dangerous part of Christian nationalism, in Bieran's view, is the use of Christian love to appear helpful to all, while actually pushing the idea that Christianity is to be elevated above all.
Christian nationalists are claiming to fight anti-Semitism, but they're really using it as a smokescreen to justify this other repression. And they're saying that they're fighting anti-Semitism, but in reality, they're kind of covering their own anti-Semitism and then trying to claim to care about Jewish safety, while at the same time, you know, pushing the beliefs that you've lifted up, that that Christianity should be kind of the central belief of this country. And so there's a real deep contradiction there.
In mid-July, people across Bloomington received a postcard in their mail. It was blue with an image of the sun rising over the earth in space. At the top, in big white letters, it read, "Discovering Revelation, coming to Ellettsville." On the back, a list of 9 different seminars taking place from August 8th to August 16th at the Ellettsville Adventist Church. It grabbed my attention for having sermons titled "The Coming New World Order," "The Seeds of Anarchy in America," and "America in Prophecy." So, I went. Attendees greeted me, and then another person guided me to a table where I could register. There were prizes for attendance, and if I came to at least 7 seminars, I'd win a Bible. About 30, mostly older people were waiting in the pews in the main seminar room, which appeared to be a dining hall for the church at one time. Later, someone told me that the south side of the church was damaged in a fire and had to be torn down. A concrete slab is all that remains of the original worship hall. The title of tonight's sermon is America in Prophecy. Pastor Rob Long is delivering a message about the intersection of faith and politics.
Don't get me wrong, guys. I wish that all Americans would become Christians. I really do. But I don't think they should be forced to be Christians by the state. Do you? But this is a huge change from what was espoused by our nation's founders like Thomas Jefferson. Look what he said. Believing that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, and he owes account to none other for his faith or worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach our what? Actions only. Is that true? I can sit in my house and hate somebody 24/7, can't I? And you can't arrest me for that. But if I go out and stab somebody or shoot somebody, I'll get arrested, right? Because it reaches our actions, not our what? Opinions. He said, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people that declared their legislature, here it is, shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. He said, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So as you hear more people, if you hear more pastors, if you hear more Christians saying that we need to use the government to accomplish the objectives of the church, you should oppose that. You should oppose that. With pen and voice, you should oppose that.
Afterwards, I sat down with Pastor Long, the voice behind the sermon. He's been preaching for about 30 years. We met in his office just off of the dining hall/worship room. One wall in his office is filled from top to bottom with books and DVDs about religion. I think a good way to always start these things is if you could just introduce yourself, just tell us who you are and what you do, and maybe a little bit about how you got into this realm.
Well, I'm Rob Long, and I'm a pastor, ordained minister in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm currently serving the Indiana Conference of Seventh-day Adventists as the Ministerial and Evangelism Director.
He offered a nuanced take on what the Bible says about the relationship between church and state. Could you describe what Bible prophecy says about separation of church and state, or kind of what your interpretation of separation of church and state is in the United States?
Well, we kind of go by what Jesus said. He said, they asked him a question, is it proper to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Of course, Israel was under Roman occupation. They were subservient to the Roman Empire. They were a province of Rome at the time. And so they brought Jesus that question, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And his answer was, bring me a coin. And they brought him a coin, and he said, whose image is on this coin? And they said, Caesar. And he said, well, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but render to God the things that are God's. And so there he made a distinction between things that we owe to the government, whatever government we happen to be living under and benefiting from, and then the things we owe to God as a sovereign over our lives, and especially, our spiritual lives. So I think he draws a distinction there between these two kingdoms, Caesar's kingdom of the world and God's kingdom, which Jesus said is not of this world, although Paul says we are citizens of heaven, no matter what country we might live in.
He believes that the separation of church and state is key to the American experiment that allows for diversity of belief and opinion.
The founders of America came here, with an experiment coming from Europe, where the church and the state were always united, and the church, namely the Church of Rome, used political powers and kings and queens to enforce religious observances and dogmas upon the people, using the arm of the state. And of course, there's a long history of persecution that goes with that. So in America, it was set up differently, to have a separation of the church and the state, where I think the First Amendment says it real clearly: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of any religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the government can't establish a federal religion that is a national religion, nor can they prohibit people in America from freely exercising their religion as long as they're acting civilly responsible. So we think that's very important to have that separation. It's really been a key to the success of the American experiment.
To Pastor Long, a Christian nationalist is someone who wishes to see Christianity established as the national religion in the United States, something he opposes heavily. And that can mean one of two things, right? One, that might be what he truly believes, or two, he's trying to distance himself from the term as others have. But he did say that separation of church and state is really important and real. Where this gets muddier is his thoughts on the government creating laws based on Christian morals. He does think the government has a responsibility to enforce some of the Ten Commandments.
If you look at the Ten Commandments, they're really divided into two parts. The first 4 commandments show our duty to God. Don't have other gods before me. Don't make images and bow down to them. Don't take God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day. And then the last 6 commandments express our duty to our fellow man, starting with our parents. Honor your father and mother. Don't kill, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't commit adultery. So I think the government has a role, and Paul brings this out in Romans chapter 13, where he talks about the powers that be are ordained by God, and that we should obey the government powers that God has put in place. But he says they're a terror to those who do evil. They bear the sword. They can punish people that do evil. But in that chapter, the commandments that he cites are from the second half of the Ten Commandments, dealing with our duty to each other. So the government has a role in keeping me from stealing from you, or slandering you, or bearing false witness about you. But the government doesn't have any role in enforcing the first 4 commandments.
Pastor Long also carries some of that cultural baggage that Andrew Whitehead described in his definition of a Christian nationalist. Pastor Long said it feels that Christians have been legislated against in recent years, citing prayer in schools and same-sex marriage, and that this rise in Christian nationalist ideas is a swing of the cultural pendulum.
Things that Christians would disagree with biblically are being legislated into law. In the area of marriage, marriage between a man and a woman versus gay marriage. So I guess a lot of Christians feel like, well, not only are we not legislating morality, but we're actually legislating immorality. And so this has kind of pushed things in a direction which has been more progressive in our culture. And I think progressives have been winning victories in the courts, and Christians have kind of gotten, for a couple of decades at least, the short end of the stick, you might say. So I think that's created then kind of more of a backlash, I guess, saying, well, we're going to use the courts then, I'm talking about Christians, we'll use the courts then to get our way. And as I said earlier, I think it would be nice if we had more laws that legislate morality in terms of the way we treat one another, relate to each other, and make that more biblical. But I think they go too far then and say, along with that, let's legislate those first 4 commandments that deal with our duty to God. And that's where you get into things like blasphemy laws or Sunday laws requiring people to worship on Sunday.
Pastor Long referred to a law in Indiana that bans the sales of vehicles on Sunday, saying that the state is, in a sense, dictating a day of worship.
If a used car dealer who owns the company decides he wants to shut his business on Sunday, that's great, fine. But I don't think a car dealer that wants to be open on Sunday should be told that he can't be because it's a law that they have to be closed on Sundays.
Pastor Long really illustrates that spectrum of Christian nationalist rhetoric that exists in this country. It isn't always as extreme as the larger-than-life personalities you see quoted in national headlines. So even though Pastor Long might agree with conservatives that the country could use a more Christian moral compass, he understands the path that lays out leads to an oppressive future for people of all faiths.
We just need to really be careful that we don't become oppressive or tyrannical in our treatment of people, especially in the area of their faith and their particular belief in religion. I'd be happy to see everybody converted and become a Christian, but I don't think that can happen by using the state to do that or the government, but it's by preaching the gospel and changing people's hearts.
Next week on Red, White, and Righteous, we'll look at the history of Christian populism and white supremacy in Indiana. We'll also introduce an active player that is connecting Christian leaders with our state legislators in order to bring about social and political change. Red, White, and Righteous is produced by Sarah Whitmire and me, Clayton Baumgarth. Bob Salzberg is our editor, and Kathy Knapp provided research and sourcing assistance.